Imagine the precise moment your body surrenders to sleep, that twilight state, where consciousness begins to dissolve into the abstract comfort of rest. For most, this transition is a silent fade to black, a biological shutdown protocol that the brain executes with seamless elegance every single night. But for a significant portion of the population, this boundary between wakefulness and sleep is not a gentle slope, but a minefield triggered by a sudden, terrifying violation of the senses. It begins without warning, a deafening sound that originates not from the external world, but from the deep recesses of the mind itself. It is described by patients as a bomb detonating, a gunshot fired next to the ear, or the clash of titanic cymbals, often accompanied by a blinding flash of light that exists only within the visual cortex. This is not a nightmare. The subject is awake, heart pounding against the ribs, flooded with adrenaline, paralyzed by the primal fear that they have just suffered a catastrophic stroke or a brain hemorrhage. This is the reality of exploding head syndrome, or EHS, a phenomenon that stands as one of the most startling glitches in the human nervous system. For decades, this condition existed in the shadows of medical obscurity, dismissed as a rarity or a symptom of madness, yet the history of this neurological anomaly stretches back much further than modern sleep science. The first definitive medical description appears in the archives of the 19th century, penned by Silas Weir Mitchell, the father of American neurology. In 1876, Mitchell documented the cases of two men who reported suffering from what he termed sensory shocks. These patients described nocturnal sensations that were violent and acoustic, with one man reporting a noise like a pistol shot that would jolt him from slumber. Mitchell, operating with the limited tools of his era, could only observe and categorize, but his initial descriptions laid the groundwork for recognizing that these were not hallucinations in the psychiatric sense, but physiological discharges, a misfiring of the brain's electrical circuitry. Despite Mitchell's early identification, the syndrome largely vanished from major medical discourse for over a century, lingering as a medical curiosity. It was not until 2005 that the American Academy of Sleep Medicine officially recognized exploding head syndrome in the International Classification of Sleep Disorders. This delay in recognition meant that for generations, sufferers bore their symptoms in silence, terrified that admitting to hearing non-existent explosions would lead to a diagnosis of schizophrenia or insanity. The isolation of the condition was compounded by its terrifying nature. When you hear a bomb go off in your head, your first instinct is survival, not scientific inquiry. The gap between the visceral terror of the experience and the benign nature of the actual condition creates a psychological paradox that defines the life of an EHS patient. To understand the mechanics of this brain glitch, we must look at the brainstem, specifically a structure known as the reticular formation. Neuroscientists and sleep researchers, such as Dr. Brian Sharpless, who has conducted some of the most extensive modern reviews on the subject, propose that EHS is essentially a failure of the brain's shutdown sequence. When we fall asleep, the brain does not simply switch off like a light bulb, it powers down in stages. The reticular formation acts as a master switchboard, responsible for reducing activity in the cortex and dampening sensory input and motor output. In a typical transition, this dampening happens smoothly, turning down the volume of the world and disconnecting the muscles to prevent us from acting out our dreams. However, in the case of exploding head syndrome, there is a delay or a malfunction in this neural handoff. Instead of a gradual fade, the reticular formation hiccups. This delay allows a sudden, chaotic burst of neuronal activity to fire across the sensory processing areas of the brain. It is comparable to a feedback loop in a microphone. For a split second, the auditory neurons fire all at once, creating the perception of a massive sound where there is none. If this surge of activity spills over into the visual cortex, the patient experiences the flash or lightning bolt that often accompanies the sound. It is a sensory seizure of sorts, a momentary short circuit where the brain startles itself awake with its own internal noise. The prevalence of this condition challenges the long-held belief that it is a rare disorder affecting only the elderly. For years, the medical literature suggested that EHS was a burden of the aging brain, a sign of neural decline in women over 50. However, groundbreaking studies conducted in the last decade have shattered this profile. A 2015 study by Washington State University, led by Sharpless, surveyed 211 undergraduate students and found that nearly 18% had experienced at least one episode of exploding head syndrome. This data suggests that the condition is not a rare anomaly of the geriatric ward, but a surprisingly common phenomenon among young adults, potentially exacerbated by the sleep deprivation and high stress levels characteristic of university life. The implications of these prevalence rates are staggering when we consider the cultural history of the supernatural. Researchers have begun to draw compelling lines between EHS, sleep paralysis, and the mythology of alien abductions and demonic visitations. Consider the narrative structure of an abduction story. The victim is lying in bed, drifting off when they are suddenly paralyzed, see blinding flashing lights and hear strange mechanical or explosive sounds. For a brain experiencing the dual terror of sleep paralysis and exploding head syndrome, these hallucinations are indistinguishable from reality. The biology provides the script for the folklore. The brain provides the special effects for the haunting. One of the most fascinating historical intersections of EHS involves the father of modern philosophy, René Descartes. In 1619, Descartes experienced a series of dreams and visions that he claimed revealed to him the foundations of a new science. In his journals, he described hearing a loud clap of thunder that woke him in terror, accompanied by a sensation of sparks or fire. Medical historians and neurologists analyzing these accounts centuries later have proposed that Descartes was not receiving divine intervention, but was suffering from a classic episode of exploding head syndrome. It is a profound irony to consider that the intellectual pivot of Western civilization, the "I think therefore I am," might have been catalyzed by a misfiring reticular formation in a cold room in Germany. The medical community has also documented the intricate relationship between EHS and other sleep disorders. It is rarely a lone wolf. It travels in a pack with insomnia and sleep paralysis. In a case study published in the Journal of Sleep Medicine, a 57-year-old Indian male reported repeated episodes of flashing sounds on the right side of his head. His anxiety over these events was so severe, it led to secondary insomnia. He became afraid to sleep. This fear conditioning is a critical aspect of the disorder's pathology. The physical symptom is benign. It causes no physical damage, no stroke, no hearing loss, but the psychological toll creates a vicious cycle where anxiety about the attack makes the brain more hyper-aroused, which in turn makes the reticular formation more likely to misfire. Recent research has also probed the genetic and physiological underpinnings of the disorder. Some hypotheses suggest a dysfunction in the calcium channels of the neurons, specifically a mutation in the CACNA1A gene, which is also linked to migraines and epilepsy. This places EHS on a spectrum of episodic cranial sensory shocks. The connection to migraines is particularly strong. Many sufferers of EHS also report a history of migraines, suggesting that their brains may be predisposed to these storms of electrical hypersensitivity. The sudden evacuation of neuronal energy in EHS mirrors the cortical spreading depression seen in migraine auras, just at a much faster, more explosive velocity. The treatment landscape for exploding head syndrome remains an area of active exploration, primarily because the condition is so often self-limiting. For many, simply receiving a diagnosis is the cure. The realization that their brain is not dying, that they are not going crazy, and that the explosion is a known biological quirk often reduces the anxiety enough to lower the frequency of attacks. However, for chronic cases where sleep is severely disrupted, pharmacological interventions have been documented. Case reports have shown success with clomipramine, a tricyclic antidepressant, and calcium channel blockers, which help stabilize the neuronal membranes and prevent that sudden synchronized discharge. In extreme cases, the disruption to life can be profound. A case documented in 2020 described a 71-year-old woman whose EHS was so persistent it required intervention. Interestingly, her symptoms, along with severe depression, resolved after electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, suggesting that a reset of the brain's electrical activity can halt the glitch. Another case involved a 45-year-old woman who suffered from both restless leg syndrome and EHS, highlighting the interconnectedness of the motor and sensory systems during the sleep transition. These cases reinforce the view that sleep is a fragile neurological performance, requiring a perfect symphony of neurochemicals to sustain, and when one instrument plays out of key, the entire orchestra can collapse into cacophony. The study of exploding head syndrome also forces us to confront the limitations of our own perception. We trust our senses implicitly. If we hear a sound, we assume a source. EHS proves that the brain is capable of generating a fully realized, high-fidelity sensory experience in the absolute absence of external stimuli. It reveals the constructive nature of reality, that what we hear and see is not a direct feed from the world, but a reconstruction by the brain. When the reconstruction fails, the result is not silence but noise. It is a reminder that our conscious experience is a fragile projection, easily disrupted by a minor delay in a few milliseconds of neural inhibition. Moreover, the impact of stress and sleep hygiene cannot be overstated in the management of EHS. The modern epidemic of sleep deprivation, fueled by blue light exposure and high cortisol lifestyles, creates the perfect storm for these parasomnias. The reticular formation is sensitive to fatigue. A tired brain is a glitch-prone brain. Studies have shown a correlation between exam periods in students and spikes in EHS episodes, validating the theory that when the system is pushed to its limit, the shutdown sequence becomes ragged and prone to error. It is a signal from the body, a violent notification that the biological machinery is overheating. As we map the brain with greater precision, conditions like EHS transition from the realm of the mysterious to the mechanical. High-density EEG studies have begun to capture these events in real time, showing the sudden suppression of alpha rhythms, the brain waves associated with relaxed wakefulness, followed by the theta waves of sleep, interrupted by the sudden spike of arousal. These objective measurements provide the concrete proof that patients have desperately needed. The explosion is real, even if the bomb is not. It validates the subjective experience of millions who have lain in the dark, heart racing, wondering why their own mind has turned against them. The journey of understanding exploding head syndrome is a testament to the evolution of medical empathy. It moves from the dismissal of hysterical symptoms to the recognition of complex neurological phenomena. It challenges physicians to listen to the bizarre, the subjective, and the terrifying descriptions of their patients without judgment. It is a bridge between the hard sciences of neurology and the soft experiences of human consciousness, proving that even the most bizarre phantom sounds have a root in the firing of ions and the flow of neurotransmitters. Ultimately, the story of EHS is a story of reassurance. It turns a monster into a mechanism. It takes the pistol shot in the night and reveals it to be nothing more than a tired neuron firing out of turn. It strips the supernatural power away from the experience and returns control to the patient. Knowing that the loud crash is just a brain hiccup allows the sufferer to roll over, take a deep breath, and go back to sleep rather than waiting for the aliens to land. If you have ever experienced a sudden loud noise as you drift off to sleep, or a blinding flash of light that jolts you awake, you are not losing your mind, and you are certainly not alone. You are experiencing a well-documented, fascinating, and largely harmless neurological event that has puzzled scientists and terrified philosophers for centuries. It is just your brain working a little too hard to switch off. This information is a tool for understanding your own biology. If this deep dive into the mysteries of the sleeping brain has shed light on your own experiences or sparked a new interest in neuroscience, consider how many others might be suffering in silence, unaware that their nighttime explosions have a name and a cause. Share this knowledge. And now, I want to hear from you. From where in the world are you watching this video, and have you or has anyone you know ever experienced the startling phenomenon of exploding head syndrome? Let us know in the comments below, and let's map this glitch together.